What would you do if the walls of your dream home started whispering secrets that were never meant to be discovered? Sarah and Marcus Chen thought they'd found the deal of a lifetime, a sprawling Victorian mansion for a fraction of its worth. But on their third night in the house, when Sarah peeled back a strip of water-damaged wallpaper in the library, she found something that made her blood run cold. Hundreds of names, carved deep into the plaster beneath. Names with dates. Names that seemed to go back over a century. And at the bottom of the list, in fresh ink that hadn't yet dried, were two names she recognized immediately, her own and her husband's. This is the story of what happened next, and why you need to hear it before it's too late. The purchase. The rain hammered against the windshield as Sarah Chen pressed her face closer to the passenger window, trying to catch her first glimpse of the property that would change their lives forever. Her husband Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, navigating their sedan through the winding driveway that seemed to stretch on endlessly through a tunnel of ancient oak trees. Their branches hung low, scraping against the roof of the car like skeletal fingers welcoming them home. "There," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, though Sarah couldn't tell if it was awe or apprehension that made him speak so softly. The Blackwood mansion emerged from the mist like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of Victorian architecture towered before them, all pointed turrets and ornate ironwork, with dozens of windows that reflected the gray sky like vacant eyes. The paint was peeling in places, revealing layers of history beneath, white over gray over what might have been a deep burgundy once upon a time. Despite its obvious need for renovation, the house possessed an undeniable grandeur, a reminder of an era when such estates were built to last for generations. Sarah felt her heart quicken. After 5 years of marriage, 3 years of saving, and countless weekends spent touring overpriced fixer-uppers in better neighborhoods, they were finally here. Finally homeowners. Finally starting the life they'd always talked about during those late-night conversations in their cramped apartment, when Marcus would sketch floor plans on napkins and Sarah would plan color schemes on her phone. "It's perfect," she breathed, and she meant it. Yes, it needed work. Yes, it was a bit isolated, sitting on 12 acres at the end of a rural road 40 minutes from the city where they both worked. Yes, the real estate agent had been almost too eager to close the deal, dropping the price twice without them even negotiating. But none of that mattered now. This was theirs. Marcus killed the engine, and for a moment, they both just sat there, staring at their future. At 32 and 34, respectively, they'd begun to worry that homeownership would remain forever out of reach, especially in a market where starter homes routinely sold for $500,000. The Blackwood mansion, with its 6,000 square feet and sprawling grounds, had been listed at just $180,000. Even accounting for the estimated $50,000 in immediate repairs, it was an impossible bargain. "Why do you think it was so cheap?" Sarah asked, not for the first time. She'd asked Marcus this question at least a dozen times since they'd first toured the property 3 weeks ago. Each time he'd given her the same rational answer. "Because it's been on the market for 3 years," Marcus said patiently, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Because it needs a new roof, updated electrical, and probably has plumbing from the Roosevelt administration. Because it's too big for most families and too far from town for anyone with a normal commute. Because we're the only people crazy enough to take this on." He smiled at her, that crooked smile that had first made her heart skip a beat in their college library 7 years ago. "Lucky us." Sarah laughed, feeling her anxiety ease slightly. Marcus had always been the practical one, the problem solver. He was a structural engineer, and he'd gone through the house with a thoroughness that had both impressed and slightly annoyed their real estate agent. He'd crawled through the attic, inspected the foundation, tested the windows, and documented every crack and concern. If Marcus said the house was structurally sound, it was structurally sound. They stepped out of the car into the drizzle, and Sarah immediately felt the temperature drop. It was early October, but it felt much colder here among the trees, as if the forest created its own microclimate. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself and grabbed one of the boxes from the trunk. The moving truck wouldn't arrive until tomorrow, but they'd brought enough supplies to camp out for their first night. Sleeping bags, a cooler full of food, basic toiletries, and a few changes of clothes. The front door was massive, made of dark oak with an ornate brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head. Marcus fumbled with the keys. There were 5 different ones on the ring the agent had given them, and they still weren't entirely sure what all of them were for. The third key turned in the lock with a satisfying click, and the door swung inward with a long, low creak that echoed through the entrance hall. "We definitely need to oil those hinges," Marcus muttered, but Sarah barely heard him. She was too busy taking in the interior of her new home. The entrance hall was magnificent. A grand staircase swept upward to the second floor, its mahogany banister still gleaming despite years of neglect. The floor was original hardwood in a herringbone pattern, scuffed and dull in places but clearly restorable. To the left was a formal sitting room with a marble fireplace, and to the right, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves built into the walls. Straight ahead, through an arched doorway, she could see into what the listing had called the Great Room. "Home sweet home," Sarah said softly, setting her box down on the dusty floor. The word home echoed slightly in the empty space, and she felt a sudden rush of emotion. This was real. This was actually happening. They spent the next few hours unloading the car and doing a more thorough walkthrough of the house than they'd been able to accomplish during their previous visits with the real estate agent, Hove, airing nearby. The mansion was even larger than Sarah had remembered. In addition to the formal rooms on the first floor, there was a massive kitchen with an ancient gas stove and a pantry the size of their old apartment's bedroom. A conservatory with cracked glass panels that looked out onto an overgrown garden, and a dining room that could easily seat 20 people. The second floor held 6 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms in various states of disrepair. The master suite was at the front of the house, with tall windows that overlooked the driveway. Sarah stood in the empty room, imagining where their bed would go, where she'd put her dresser, how the morning light would look streaming through those windows. "We could put a nursery in the room right next door," Marcus said from the doorway, and Sarah turned to him with surprise. They'd talked about kids, of course, in that vague way that young married couples do, but he'd never brought it up so directly before. "Getting ahead of yourself, aren't you?" she teased, but her heart warmed at the thought. There was something about this house that made the future feel tangible. She could see it all: children running through the halls, holiday dinners in that enormous dining room, summer parties in the garden once they'd tamed the wildness, lazy Sunday mornings reading in the library, winter evenings by the fire. A whole life stretching out before them in this beautiful, creaky, imperfect house. The third floor was smaller, just 3 rooms and a bathroom, plus access to the attic. The ceilings were lower here, the walls closing in, and Sarah found herself feeling slightly claustrophobic. One of the rooms had clearly been a LD's bedroom once. There was faded wallpaper with a pattern of sailing ships, and the closet still had a growth chart penciled on the inside of the door. The mark stopped at age 8, she noticed. She wondered what had happened to that child, whether they'd simply outgrown the room or if something else had occurred. "This floor gives me weird vibes," Sarah admitted as they headed back downstairs. "I vote we save it for last in the renovation." "Deal," Marcus agreed easily. "We've got more than enough to keep us busy on the first 2 floors anyway." As evening approached, they made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in the kitchen, eating them while sitting on the floor of the library, which Sarah had already claimed as her favorite room. The built-in shelves begged to be filled with books, and she'd already started making a mental list of all the volumes she'd buy once they had a bit more financial breathing room. The room had good bones, as Marcus would say, with beautiful crown molding and a bay window with a built-in reading seat. "I'm going to spend so many hours in here," Sarah said dreamily. She was a freelance copy editor, which meant she could work from anywhere, and she'd already envisioned herself curled up in that window seat with her laptop, red-penning manuscripts while looking out at the garden. "I know," Marcus said, smiling at her. "I think that's why we bought a house with a library. Because we're those people now. Homeowners who read. Sounds pretty good to me." They finished their sandwiches and cleaned up their minimal mess, then retrieved their sleeping bags from the car. They'd planned to sleep in the master bedroom, but when they got up the room felt too big, too empty, almost cavernous in its vastness. By unspoken agreement, they ended up back in the library, laying out their sleeping bags in front of the fireplace, even though they had no firewood to actually light it. The house settled around them as darkness fell, creating the symphony of sounds that old houses make: creaks and groans, the whisper of wind through gaps in the window frames, the occasional scurrying of what were probably mice in the walls. Sarah tried not to think about the mice. They'd deal with that later. For now, she focused on the feeling of Marcus's hand in hers, the satisfaction of having finally achieved this goal they'd been working toward for so long. "Are you happy?" Marcus asked quietly, and she could hear the vulnerability in his voice. He'd taken a risk, trusting her instinct about this house when the logical part of his brain had probably been screaming at him to walk away from something so ambitious, so potentially overwhelming. "I'm so happy," Sarah assured him, squeezing his hand. "This is everything I wanted. We're going to make this place incredible." "We are," he agreed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof, wrapped in sleeping bags that smelled like the camping trips they used to take when they were first dating, when they were too broke to do anything else but hike and sleep under the stars and talk about their dreams that now included crown molding and hardwood floors and a house big enough to get lost in. Sarah woke in the middle of the night to darkness so complete it felt like a physical presence. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds and the way the shadows seemed to move differently here. Then it all came back. The house, the library, their first night in the Blackwood mansion. She fumbled for her phone to check the time. 3:17 a.m. The witching hour, her grandmother would have called it, though Sarah had never been superstitious. Still, there was something unsettling about the quality of the darkness here, the way it seemed to press in from all sides. She considered waking Marcus but decided against it. He was sleeping so peacefully, his breathing deep and even, and she didn't want to seem neurotic on their very first night. Instead, she lay there, listening. The rain had stopped, and in its absence she could hear the house more clearly. There was a rhythmic creaking that might have been a shutter loose in the wind, or might have been footsteps on the floor above. There was a faint whistling sound that could have been air moving through old pipes, or could have been something else entirely. And underneath it all, so quiet she might have been imagining it, was a sound almost like whispered conversation, just at the edge of hearing. Sarah closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly, counting backwards from 100 the way she did when she had trouble sleeping. This was just an old house. Old houses made sounds. There was nothing to be afraid of. They'd gotten an incredible deal on an incredible property, and she was not going to let her imagination ruin it. By the time she reached 73, she was asleep again. Morning came with surprising brightness, sunlight streaming through the library windows and illuminating dancing dust motes. In the air. Sarah woke to find Marcus already up, standing at the window with a cup of coffee from the thermos they'd brought. "Morning, homeowner," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Sleep okay?" "Great," Sarah lied, accepting the coffee he poured for her. No need to mention her middle-of-the-night anxiety. In the cheerful light of morning, it all seemed silly anyway. "What's the plan for today?" "The moving truck should be here by 10, Marcus said, checking his phone. "I was thinking we could start by deciding what goes where, then tackle some of the cleaning. I want to get the kitchen functional as quickly as possible. I love you, but I don't want to eat sandwiches for every meal." They spent the morning doing exactly that, going room by room and making decisions. The formal sitting room would eventually be a proper living space, but for now, they'd just put the basics there. Couch, TV, coffee table. The great room would be a multi-purpose space for entertaining. The dining room would stay empty until they could afford a table that did it justice. Their bedroom furniture would go in the master, obviously, and they'd use one of the other second-floor bedrooms as Marcus's home office. The moving truck arrived exactly at 10, and for the next several hours, Sarah and Marcus were too busy to think about anything except directing the movers and unpacking boxes. It was exhausting work, but there was something deeply satisfying about it too. Every box they unpacked, every piece of furniture they placed, made the house feel a little more like theirs. By late afternoon, they'd made significant progress. The kitchen was functional, the bedroom was set up, and they'd even managed to fill a few of the bookshelves in the library. Sarah stood back, surveying their work with pride. It still looked sparse, and there was so much left to do, but it was starting to feel like a home. "I'm going to run to the hardware store before it closes," Marcus announced, jingling the car keys. "We need light bulbs, trash bags, and about 1,000,000 other things. Want to come?" Sarah shook her head. "I think I'll stay here and keep unpacking. We're on a roll." You sure? It's a 40-minute drive. I'm sure. Besides, someone should be here in case any of our new neighbors stop by to say hello. It was a joke. They hadn't seen a single sign of neighbors since they'd arrived, and the nearest house was at least a mile away. But Marcus smiled anyway. Okay, text me if you think of anything else we need. I'll be back in a couple of hours. Sarah listened to the car start and pull away, the sound of the engine gradually fading until she was left in complete silence. She stood in the entrance hall for a moment, experiencing the strange sensation of being truly alone in the house for the first time. It felt different without Marcus there, bigger somehow and emptier despite all the furniture they'd just moved in. She shook off the feeling and headed back to the library, where she still had 3 boxes of books to unpack. The afternoon sun was starting to slant through the windows, creating long rectangles of golden light on the floor. Sarah put on a playlist on her phone, something upbeat and familiar to fill the silence, and got to work. She was shelving mysteries on the far wall when she noticed the water damage. It was subtle, just a slight discoloration on the W. Wallpaper near the corner where the built-in shelves met the exterior wall. Sarah frowned, running her hand over it. The wallpaper was damp to the touch, and when she pressed a little harder, she could feel that the plaster underneath was soft, almost spongy. Great, she muttered. Another thing to add to the endless list of repairs. She made a mental note to mention it to Marcus when he got back. They'd need to check if there was a leak in the roof above this section, or if it was condensation from the poor insulation, or... The wallpaper tore under her fingers. It happened suddenly, without warning. One moment she was just examining it, and the next, a large strip of the faded floral pattern was peeling away in her hand, revealing the plaster wall beneath. Sarah gasped, more from surprise than anything else, and took a step back, the strip of wallpaper dangling from her fingers like dead skin. That's when she saw the names. They were carved into the plaster, each one carefully etched in letters about an inch tall. They ran in neat columns, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, covering the entire section of wall that had been hidden behind the wallpaper. Next to each name was a date. Sarah's heart began to pound as she leaned closer, trying to read them in the dimming light. The names at the top were old, the carved letters smoothed by time. Eleanor Pritchard, 1887. James Whitmore, 1889. Abigail Sutton, 1891. The list went on, marching down the wall in chronological order. Margaret Chen, 1903. Robert Blackwood, 1915. Elizabeth Morrison, 1923. The dates continued through the decades. Names from the 30s, the 40s, the 60s, the 80s. Whoever had carved. These had been adding to them for over a century. Sarah's hands began to shake as she traced the letters with her finger, feeling the grooves worn into the plaster. What was this? Some kind of memorial? A record of the people who had lived in the house? She continued reading, moving down the wall as the dates became more recent. Thomas Walsh, 1994. Jennifer Park, 2001. David Moreno, 2008. And then, at the very bottom, in letters that looked fresher, sharper than all the others, she found 2 names that made her breath catch in her throat. Sarah Chen, 2024. Marcus Chen, 2024. Her phone clattered to the floor, the music cutting off abruptly, plunging the room into sudden, terrible silence. Sarah stumbled backward, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Those were their names, their actual names, carved into the wall of a house they'd only owned for 2 days, with dates that indicated this year, this moment. This couldn't be real. It had to be a joke, some kind of sick prank. Maybe the previous owners had known the Chens were buying the house and had done this to scare them. But that didn't make sense. They'd just closed on the house 2 days ago, and this wallpaper had clearly been intact until she'd just torn it. The plaster around their names looked slightly different from the rest, fresher somehow, as if it had been carved recently. But that was impossible because no one had been in the house except the real estate agent, and Marcus, and her. Sarah grabbed her phone from where it had fallen and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the wall more clearly. In the harsh LED light, she could see details she'd missed before. Each name was carved with incredible precision, the letters uniform in size and spacing. But more disturbing than that were the dates. They weren't birth dates or move-in dates. Sarah did the mental math on a few of them, her stomach churning as a pattern emerged. Eleanor Pritchard, 1887. According to the library records they'd seen when researching the house's history, Eleanor Pritchard had been the wife of the man who built the Blackwood Mansion. She died in 1887, less than a year after moving in. James Whitmore, 1889. Sarah didn't know who James Whitmore was, but she could guess. 2 years after Eleanor, another name, another date. All of these names weren't commemorations, they were death dates. Her phone rang, shattering the silence and making her scream. She fumbled with it, nearly dropping it again, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "Hello?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Hey, I just got to the hardware store. Did you think of anything else we need?" Marcus sounded cheerful, normal, completely oblivious to the nightmare that Sarah had just discovered. Sarah stared at the wall, at their names carved at the bottom of that terrible list. She should tell him. She should tell him right now, should demand that he come home immediately, should insist that they leave this house and never come back. But the words stuck in her throat, because saying it out loud would make it real, would mean acknowledging that something was terribly, horribly wrong with the house they'd just sunk their entire savings into purchasing. "Sarah? You still there?" "I'm here," she managed. "No, I can't think of anything. Just hurry back, okay? You sound weird. Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Just tired. Long day. Drive safe." She hung up before he could ask any more questions, her hands still trembling. She looked at the wall again, half hoping that she'd imagined the whole thing, that when she looked back their names would be gone. But no. There they were, carved into the plaster in letters that matched all the others, Sarah Chen and Marcus Chen, with dates that claimed they would both die in 2024. 2 months. According to whoever or whatever had carved those names, they had 2 months left to live. Sarah forced herself to take deep breaths, to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. There was always an explanation. Maybe this was some kind of art project by the previous owner. Maybe it was a guest book of sorts, and the dates represented when people had visited. Maybe she was misinterpreting the whole thing, letting her imagination run wild in an old house that was bound to have some quirks. But even as she tried to rationalize it, she couldn't shake the cold dread that had settled in her stomach. Those names were too perfect, too precise to be random, and there were too many of them spanning too many decades to be a coincidence or a joke. She needed to research this, needed to find out who all these people were, whether they'd actually died on the dates inscribed next to their names. Needed to prove to herself that this was all just a strange historical oddity and not something more sinister. Sarah carefully took pictures of the wall, making sure to capture all the names, then grabbed her laptop and curled up in the window seat. She started with the most recent names, figuring they'd be easiest to Rife. Thomas Walsh, 2004. She typed the name into a search engine along with the town name and the word obituary. The results made her blood run cold. Thomas Walsh, 54 of Ashford County, passed away unexpectedly on November 3, 2004 at his residence. Thomas was a beloved husband, father, and local businessman who will be greatly missed by all who knew him. He is survived by his wife, Patricia, and his 2 children. November 3, 2004. Sarah checked the date carved into the wall. November 3, 2004. An exact match. Her hands shaking, she searched for the next name. Jennifer Park, 2001. Found her obituary immediately. Died on August 17, 2001. The exact date carved on the wall. David Moreno, 2008. Car accident on June 22, 2008. Matching the carved date perfectly. Sarah worked backwards through the names, her horror growing with each confirmation. Every single person she could find a record for had died on exactly the date carved next to their name, and all of them had died in this house. By the time she heard Marcus's car pulling into the driveway, she'd verified over 20 names, and every single one had matched. The sun had set while she'd been researching, and the library had grown dark around her, illuminated only by the glow of her laptop screen. She felt frozen, paralyzed by the weight of what she'd discovered. The front door opened. "Sarah, I'm back. You would not believe the lines at that place. Why does everyone need to go to the hardware store on a Saturday evening?" Sarah couldn't move, couldn't speak. Marcus's footsteps echoed through the entrance hall, moving from room to room. "Sarah, where are you?" "Library," she finally called out, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Marcus appeared in the doorway, laden with shopping bags, his smile fading as he saw her expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I found something," Sarah said, "in the wall, behind the wallpaper." She gestured weakly to the exposed section of plaster, and Marcus set down his bags, moving closer to examine it. She watched his face as he read the names, saw the confusion, then the concern, then the moment when he reached the bottom and saw their own names. His skin went pale, visible even in the dim light. "Oh, what the hell is this?" he whispered. "I've been researching," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "Every name on that wall, Marcus, every single person I could find a record for. They all died on the exact dates written next to their names, and they all died in this house." Marcus continued to stare at the wall, at their names, at the dates that claimed they had only 2 months left. "That's not possible," he said finally. "That's not. Someone's messing with us. Someone who knew we were buying the house added our names to scare us." "The wallpaper was intact," Sarah pointed out. "I tore it by accident. And even if someone did add our names, what about all the others? What about the names from the 1800s, Marcus? Who carved those?" "I don't know, but there has to be a rational explanation. People don't predict deaths a century in advance. That's not how the world works." "Then how do you explain it?" Sarah's voice rose, all the fear and frustration of the past 2 hours pouring out. "How do you explain that Thomas Walsh died on November 30, 2004, and that date has been carved into our wall since before he even moved into this house? How do you explain that there are names here from over 100 years ago, all with death dates that match historical records?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he always made when he was stressed. "I can't explain it. But that doesn't mean we should jump to supernatural conclusions. There's probably something we're missing, some detail that makes sense of all this. Our names are on that wall, Marcus." "I know." His voice was quiet now, strained. "I know they are." They stood there in the darkness of the library, facing the wall of names like it was a judgment that had already been passed. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the old house creak and groan around them. Somewhere upstairs, a shutter banged against the siding, a rhythmic sound that echoed through the empty rooms. "What do we do?" Sarah asked finally. Marcus was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was determined. "We don't panic. We research. We figure out the history of this house and everyone who's lived here. We find out what actually happened to all these people. And we prove that this is just an elaborate hoax or a bizarre historical record, nothing more. And if we can't prove that, then we'll deal with that when we come to it. But we can't make any decisions based on fear and speculation. We need facts." It was so typically Marcus, this response, logical, methodical, refusing to accept anything without evidence. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that there was a reasonable explanation for all of this. But she couldn't stop staring at their names, carved in letters that looked so fresh, so deliberate, as if someone, or some thing, had known exactly when they would die. "I don't want to sleep in this house tonight," Sarah admitted. Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay, we can get a hotel. But Sarah, we can't run every time something strange happens. This is our home. We put everything we had into this place. I know, I just need one night to process this and figure out what to do next." "All right," Marcus agreed. "Let me grab some clothes and we'll go." As they packed an overnight bag and locked up the house, Sarah couldn't help but feel like they were making a mistake. They should be calling the police, or a priest, or someone who dealt with impossible situations. But what would they say? That they'd found names carved in a wall and some of them matched death records? It sounded insane even to her, and she'd seen it with her own eyes. They drove in silence to a small hotel about 20 miles away, the only one they could find on short notice. The room was generic and impersonal, with mass-produced art on the walls and a comforter that smelled faintly of detergent. But it felt safe in a way the mansion didn't, contained and ordinary and free of carved names that predicted death. They lay in bed, neither of them sleeping despite their exhaustion. Sarah could hear Marcus breathing in the darkness next to her, could sense that he was as awake as she was. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked quietly. "I believe in cause and effect," Marcus answered. "I believe in physics and probability. I don't believe that our futures are written in stone. But what if they are? What if whoever lived in that house before us could see the future somehow, and they wrote down what they saw? Then I'll change it, Marcus said firmly. If our deaths are supposed to happen in that house, we'll leave. We'll sell it, take the loss, and move somewhere else. We're not bound to this place. But even as he said it, Sarah heard the doubt in his voice. They'd put their entire life savings into the Blackwood mansion. They'd signed a mortgage that would take 30 years to pay off. They'd quit their apartment, given notice to their landlord, changed their address with the post office. Leaving wouldn't be simple, and it wouldn't be quick. And according to the wall, they only had 2 months. Sarah finally fell asleep sometime after 3 in the morning, and when she did, she dreamed of the library. In her dream, she was standing in front of the wall of names, but now they were glowing, pulsing with a faint blue light. As she watched, new names appeared, carving themselves into the plaster letter by letter, as if written by an invisible hand. She tried to look away, but she couldn't move, couldn't close her eyes. The names kept coming, an endless litany of the dead and the dying, and at the bottom, their own names burned brighter than all the others, a beacon of doom that she couldn't escape. She woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in the unfamiliar hotel bed. Morning light was streaming through the thin curtains, and Marcus was already up, standing by the window with his laptop open on the desk. "Did you sleep at all?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. "A little," Marcus lied. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes that she'd never seen before. "I've been doing research." Looking into the history of the house, Sarah got out of bed and moved to stand beside looking at the screen. He'd found old newspaper archives, census records, property deeds. The Blackwood mansion had been built in 1886 by a man named Cornelius Blackwood, a railroad tycoon who'd made his fortune in the boom years after the Civil War. He'd built the house as a wedding present for his new bride, Eleanor Pritchard. Eleanor, the first name on the wall. According to the records Marcus had found, she'd died less than a year after moving in, though the cause of death was listed simply as sudden illness. Cornelius had remarried within 2 years to a woman named Catherine, who'd lived in the house for over 30 years before passing away at the age of 78. No death date for Catherine on the wall, Sarah noted. "I think I've found a pattern," Marcus said, pulling up a spreadsheet where he'd been compiling information. "Not everyone who lived in the house has their name on that wall. Only certain people. I'm trying to figure out what they have in common." Sarah leaned over his shoulder, scanning the list. He was right. There were gaps in the chronology, years where the house must have been occupied, but no names appeared on the wall. And the names that were there didn't seem to follow any obvious pattern of age, gender, or relationship to the house. "What if it's not about who they were," Sarah said slowly, "but about how they died?" Marcus looked up at her, and she could see him making the same connections she was. "You think the wall only shows people who died violently or unexpectedly? I don't know. But Eleanor Pritchard, the first name, the records say she died of sudden illness. That could mean anything. Poisoning, heart attack, who knows? N.D. Thomas Walsh, I found his obituary. It said he died unexpectedly at his residence. That usually means suicide or some kind of accident. So the wall predicts tragic deaths," Marcus said, his voice flat. "That's somehow worse than just predicting any deaths." They spent the rest of the morning at the hotel, digging deeper into the histories of the names on the wall. What they found was grim. Eleanor Pritchard had indeed died suddenly, according to a letter Marcus found in a historical society archive, possibly from poisoning, though it was never confirmed. James Whitmore, the second name, had fallen from the 3rd-floor balcony. Margaret Chen, no relation, just an unfortunate coincidence of names, had died in a kitchen fire. Robert Blackwood, possibly a descendant of the original owner, had shot himself in the library. Every name they could verify had died in unusual, often violent circumstances. And every one of those deaths had occurred in the Blackwood mansion. "We can't go back there," Sarah said finally. "Marcus, we can't. Not with our names on that wall." "We have to," Marcus countered. "We need to understand what we're dealing with. And besides, running away won't necessarily save us. If the wall is predicting our deaths, it doesn't say we have to be in the house when it happens, but everyone else was. Everyone else died in the house, that we know of." Maybe some people saw their names and left, and maybe they still died on those dates, just somewhere else. We don't have enough information to make assumptions. Sarah wanted to argue, but she was too tired, too overwhelmed, and part of her, the part that had fallen in love with the Blackwood Mansion D, despite all its flaws, didn't want to give up on it so easily. They'd invested everything in this place, their money, their dreams, their future. She wasn't ready to walk away without a fight. "Okay," she said finally. "We go back, we research, we figure this out. But Marcus, promise me something, anything. If we can't find a rational explanation, if this really is some kind of curse or prophecy or whatever, you'll agree to leave, no matter what it costs us." Marcus hesitated, and Sarah knew he was calculating the financial implications, the hit to their credit, the years of savings that would be lost. But finally he nodded. "I promise. Our lives are worth more than any house." They checked out of the hotel at noon and made the drive back to the mansion in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The house looked different in the daylight, less ominous but somehow more melancholy, like an aging beauty aware of her own decay. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions as they pulled into the driveway. Fear, yes, but also a strange sense of defiance. This house was trying to scare them away, and she refused to be scared. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. The boxes they'd been unpacking still sat in the library, her laptop still on the window seat where she'd abandoned it. The wall of names was still there, of course, still visible through the torn wallpaper. Sarah forced herself to look at it, really look at it, in the full light of day. "We should photograph all of these," she said. "Document everything before we do anything else." They spent the afternoon doing exactly that, creating a detailed photographic record of every name and date on the wall. Marcus measured the wall, noting its dimensions and location within the house. Sarah created a spreadsheet, cataloging each name along with whatever information they could find about that person. As they worked, a plan began to form. They would research every single person on that wall, find out not just when but how they died. They would look for patterns, for connections, for any clue that might explain this impossible list. And they would search the rest of the house, looking for other hidden messages, other clues to what was happening here. "We should check behind all the wallpaper," Marcus said as evening approached. "If there are names in one wall, there might be more elsewhere." It was a daunting task. The house had wallpaper in nearly every room, but they started methodically, beginning with the library. Marcus carefully peeled back sections of wallpaper, checking the plaster underneath, while Sarah documented what they found. Behind the wallpaper on the opposite wall, they found something new, not names this time, but words. A message carved in the same careful lettering as the names, hidden for who knew how long. "To those who find these words, the house remembers. The house always remembers. It knows who you are, it knows what you've done, and it knows when you will pay. Your name is already written. Your date is already carved. There is no escape, only acceptance. We are all here forever, bound to this place by our sins and our sorrows. Welcome home. The investigation." Sarah read the message 3 times, her mouth dry, before she could speak. "This is insane. This is actually insane." Marcus was silent, his hand still resting on the exposed plaster, tracking the carved words with his fingertips. In the fading afternoon light, his face looked haggard, older than his 34 years. "It's someone's idea of a sick joke. It has to be." "You keep saying that, but what if it's not?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "What if this house really is cursed, or haunted or whatever, and we just signed our lives away to it?" "Houses can't be cursed," Marcus insisted, but even he sounded less certain than he had yesterday. "There's always a rational explanation. Always." "Then explain this rationally." Sarah gestured to the message, to the wall of names visible on the other side of the room. "Explain how someone predicted the exact death dates of dozens of people spanning over a century. Explain how our names got on that wall when we only bought this place 3 days ago, and the wallpaper was intact until yesterday." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He walked to the window, staring out at the overgrown garden where shadows were lengthening as the sun dropped toward the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, defeated in a way that frightened Sarah more than any message on a wall. "I can't explain it. not yet. But I refuse to believe we're doomed because of something carved in plaster. We make our own choices, Sarah. We control our own fate." Sarah wanted to believe him. She'd always been drawn to Marcus's rationality, his engineer's mind that could reduce any problem to its component parts and find solutions. But this felt bigger than logic, older than reason. The house around them seemed to breathe with a malevolent awareness, as if it were listening to every word they said, waiting to see what they would do. "I need some air," she said abruptly, grabbing her jacket. "I'm going to walk the property, clear my head." "Want company?" "No, I need to think." Outside, the October air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of dying leaves and damp earth. Sarah walked without direction, following overgrown paths through the garden and into the woods that bordered the property. The trees here were old, their trunks thick and gnarled, branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the remaining daylight. She walked until she couldn't see the house anymore, until she was surrounded by nothing but trees and the sound of her own breathing. Then she stopped, leaning against a massive oak, and let herself cry. Great, heaving sobs that she'd been holding back since she first saw their names on that wall. She cried for the dream that was dying, for the future they'd imagined in this house, for the simplicity of life before they'd found those names. When the tears finally stopped, she felt empty but slightly clearer. She needed to make a plan, needed to decide what they were going to do, whether they were going to stay and fight or cut their losses and run, and she needed to be honest with herself about what she believed. Did she believe the house was cursed, or haunted, or possessed of some kind of terrible prescience? Yes, God help her, but yes, she did. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it brought a strange kind of relief. At least now she knew what they were dealing with, or thought she did. Not faulty plumbing or bad electrical that could be fixed with money and time, but something deeper, something that had been here long before they arrived, and would remain long after they were gone. Sarah pulled out her phone to check the time, and was surprised to see she had a signal out here in the woods. More surprising was the email notification. 3 new messages from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line made her breath catch, about the Blackwood mansion. Her hands shaking slightly, she opened the first email. It was from someone named Patricia Walsh. "Dear Miss Chen, I saw that the Blackwood property recently sold, and I felt compelled to reach out. My late husband Thomas lived in that house for 2 years before he died in 2004. I know this might sound strange, but I need to warn you, leave that house immediately. Don't question it, don't try to understand it, just get out while you still can." Thomas was a skeptic like you probably are. When he found the names in the wall, he laughed it off as an elaborate prank. He spent months researching, trying to prove it was a hoax. But as his date approached, he started to change. He became paranoid, convinced the house was watching him, whispering to him. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. I begged him to leave, but he refused. He said we'd invested too much to just walk away. On November 3rd, I found him in the library. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but I know what really happened. The house took him, just like it said it would, just like it's probably promised to take you. Please, if you value your life, get out now. Sell it, burn it down, I don't care. Just don't let it have you too. Patricia Walsh. Sarah's heart hammered as she opened the second email. This one was from someone named Jennifer. Park's sister. You don't know me, but I know that house. My sister died there in 2001. She'd only been living there for 3 months when she found the wall. She thought it was fascinating, started treating it like a research project. She documented everything, interviewed former residents, tried to trace the history back to the beginning. The last time I spoke to her, a week before she died, she told me she'd figured out the pattern. She said the house feeds on fear and regret, that it traps people who carry guilt or sorrow. She was planning to leave, said she'd found a way to break the curse, but she never got the chance. They found her at the bottom of the main staircase. Broken neck. The police said she must have tripped, but Jenny was the most careful person I knew. She didn't trip. I don't know if the house can be stopped, but I know what my sister discovered. It's not about the date. The date is just when the house has enough of whatever it feeds on. If you can find peace, if you can let go of whatever brought you there, maybe you can change your fate. I hope you make it out. I really do. The third email was from someone who identified himself only as Robert, and it was brief but chilling. The house knows your secrets. It knew mine. That's why I couldn't leave, and why you won't either. You think you can solve this with research and rationality, but you can't. The only way out is to become someone the house doesn't recognize anymore. Someone who isn't carrying what you're carrying. Good luck. You'll need it. Sarah stood frozen in the woods, her phone clutched in her hand, trying to process what she'd just read. How did these people know to contact her? How did they even have her email address? The house had only just sold, and their contact information should have been confidential, unless the house had told them. Unless this was all part of whatever game or curse or malevolent intelligence governed this place. She needed to show these emails to Marcus. A branch snapped behind her. Sarah spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows and the growing darkness of evening. Still, she had the overwhelming sensation of being watched, as if the forest itself had eyes. She started walking back toward the house, faster than she'd intended, fighting the urge to break into a run. It was irrational. There was nothing chasing her, no immediate danger, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with every step. By the time she emerged from the trees and saw the mansion looming ahead, lights blazing in the windows where Marcus must have been going from room to room, she was nearly sprinting. She burst through the front door, breathing hard, and found Marcus in the library surrounded by papers and books he'd pulled from their boxes. He looked up in alarm when he saw her face. What happened? Sarah held out her phone wordlessly, letting him read the emails. She watched his expression shift from confusion to concern to something harder to define. Fear mixed with determination, maybe, or resignation mixed with defiance. "This doesn't change anything," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Marcus, these people are trying to warn us. People who lost someone to this house. We need to listen to them, or someone who knows we bought the property is trying to scare us into leaving so they can buy it cheap." Marcus set down her phone and ran his hands through his hair again, that stress gesture that was becoming increasingly familiar. "We don't know these people. We don't know if these stories are even true. So you think it's all a conspiracy? Someone carved those names, someone researched all those death dates, someone is sending us fake emails, all just to trick us into selling a house we bought 3 days ago?" Sarah could hear the hysteria creeping into her voice but couldn't stop it. "That's your rational explanation?" "I don't know." Marcus's voice rose to match hers. "I don't know what's happening, okay? I don't know how to explain any of this. But I know we can't make decisions based on panic and ghost stories. These aren't ghost stories. They're warnings from people who watched their loved ones die in this house." They stood facing each other across the library, breathing hard, the weight of the past 48 hours pressing down on them both. It was their first real fight since they'd gotten married, Sarah realized. 5 years together and they'd never raised their voices at each other until now. Until this house. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly, deflating. "I'm sorry, you're right. We need to take this seriously." Sarah crossed the room and pulled him into a hug, feeling his arms wrap around her, both of them holding on like drowning people clutching at wreckage. "I'm scared," she whispered into his shoulder. "Me too," he admitted. "But we're going to figure this out. Together." They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Then Sarah pulled back and gestured to the papers spread across the floor. "What's all this?" "Research. I've been going through everything I could find about the house's history, and I think I've found something." Marcus picked up a yellowed newspaper clipping, handling it carefully. "This is from 1887, reporting on Eleanor Pritchard's death. Listen to this. Mrs. Blackwood's untimely passing has cast a pall over the household. Servants report strange occurrences in the weeks leading to her demise, objects moving on their own, voices heard in empty rooms, and Mrs. Blackwood's increasing conviction that the house itself was alive and aware. Her physician attributed these claims to hysteria, but those close to her believe she truly sensed some malevolent presence in her new home." "So the house was haunted from the very beginning," Sarah said softly. "Or people believed it was, which might amount to the same thing." Marcus set down the clipping and picked up a leather-bound journal. "I found this in one of the boxes in the basement. It belonged to someone named Catherine Morse, who lived here in the 1920s. She wasn't on the wall. She moved out after 6 months and lived to be 93, but she wrote about the house, about the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for something. Marcus opened the journal to a marked page and read aloud. November 15th, 1923. I can no longer deny what I feel in this house. It is not merely old or unsettling, it is aware. It knows my thoughts, my fears, my deepest shames. I feel it particularly in the library, where the walls seem to press closer each day. Last night, I dreamed of names carved in stone, a litany of the dead and dying. When I woke, I found myself standing before the library wall, my fingers bloody, though I have no memory of how I got there. I must leave this place before it claims me as it has claimed so many others. She felt it too, Sarah said. The same thing Thomas Walsh's widow described. The same thing Jennifer Park's sister mentioned. The house feeding on fear and regret. Marcus nodded slowly. I've been thinking about what Robert's email said, about the house knowing our secrets. What if this isn't random? What if the house somehow chooses its victims based on something specific, some vulnerability or guilt that makes them susceptible? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we need to figure out what the house knows about us, what it's feeding on, because if we can understand that, maybe we can find a way to protect ourselves. The idea made Sarah deeply uncomfortable, like being asked to expose her deepest wounds to examination. Everyone had secrets, things they'd rather not examine too closely. But if Marcus was right, if the house was somehow using those against them. Okay, she said finally, where do we start? They spent the evening in the library. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, neither of them wanted to leave that room, talking about their lives, their pasts, the things they'd never told anyone. Marcus confessed to the guilt he still carried over his younger brother's accident 15 years ago, how he'd been supposed to be watching him but had been distracted by a video game, how those 5 minutes of inattention had resulted in a fall that left his brother with permanent nerve damage. Sarah talked about her mother's death from cancer when Sarah was 19, how she'd been away at college living her best life while her mother was dying, how she'd missed the last week because she'd been too afraid to come home and face it. They talked about smaller things too, the friend Marcus had betrayed in college by sleeping with his girlfriend, the abortion Sarah had gotten at 22 that she'd never told her family about, the lies they'd both told, and the people they'd both hurt in the careless way that people do when they're young and think they have forever to make amends. It was cathartic in a way, this confession session, but it was also terrifying. Because with every secret revealed, every guilt acknowledged, the house seemed to press closer around them. The walls creaked more frequently, the shadows grew deeper, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was listening, taking note, preparing to use everything they'd said against them. Do you feel that? She asked Marcus around midnight. They were still in the library, having moved on from confessions to researching the other people on the wall, trying to find patterns in their lives and deaths. Feel what? The house. It's different now, like it knows us better. Marcus looked around the room, and Sarah saw him shiver slightly. Yeah, I feel it. They decided to sleep in the library again, neither willing to admit they were too frightened to go upstairs alone. As Sarah lay in her sleeping bag, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling from the small lantern they'd left burning, she thought about all the people whose names were carved in that wall. Had they felt this same presence? Had they tried to fight it, to run from it, to understand it? Or had they simply accepted their fate, watching the calendar march toward the date that had already been written for them? Her phone buzzed with a new email. Sarah almost didn't check it. It was nearly 1 a.m. and she was exhausted, but something made her look. The email was from an address she'd never seen before. The Blackwood House at oldmail.com. The subject line was blank. The message itself consisted of a single sentence. You cannot run from what lives inside you. Sarah's hands went numb, the phone nearly slipping from her grasp. Marcus, wake up. He stirred, mumbling. What is it? The house just emailed me. That got him fully awake. He grabbed the phone from her, reading the message in the dim light. This is impossible. Email accounts don't just create themselves. Someone is doing this. Who? Who even knows we're here besides the real estate agent and the moving company? I don't know, but there has to be a logical... Marcus stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. Sarah, look at the sent date. She looked. The email was dated November 3rd, 2024, 2 months from now. The same date carved next to their names on the wall. "That's not possible," Sarah whispered. "That's not. Emails can't come from the future." But there it was, timestamp and all, a message from a date that hadn't happened yet but was somehow inexorably approaching. A date when, according to the wall, they would both die. Sarah and Marcus sat in silence, staring at the phone, as if looking long enough would make the impossible message disappear. But it remained, stubbornly present, a communication from their own deaths. "We need to leave," Sarah said finally. "Tonight. Right now. We pack what we can fit in the car and we drive away from here and we never come back." For the first time, Marcus didn't argue. He just nodded, his face grim. "Okay, let's go." They moved through the house quickly, throwing clothes and toiletries into bags, not bothering to pack carefully or logically. Sarah grabbed her laptop and phone charger. Marcus collected important documents from his office. They were halfway to the car, arms loaded with bags, when the front door slammed shut. Not drifted closed, slammed, with enough force to rattle the windows in their frames. Marcus tried the handle. It wouldn't turn. "The key," Sarah said urgently. "Use the key." Marcus fumbled with the key ring, trying each of the 5 keys in succession. None of them worked. The lock mechanism itself seemed to have changed somehow, the keyhole no longer matching any key they possessed. "Back door," Marcus said tersely, and they ran through the house to the kitchen. The back door was similarly locked, and again none of their keys worked. They tried every exit they could find, the library's French doors that led to the garden, the side door from the mudroom, even the windows, but they were all sealed shut as if they'd never been meant to open at all. "This isn't happening," Sarah said, hearing the panic in her own voice. "This isn't real. Houses don't just trap people inside them." But this one did. They were locked in, every exit sealed, the Blackwood mansion holding them like a fist that refused to open. Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm calling 911. But when he tried, there was no signal. Sarah checked her phone too. The same device that had received emails from the future now showed 0 bars, no connection at all to the outside world. "We have to break a window," Sarah said. "We'll break a window and climb out." They tried. Marcus grabbed a dining room chair and swung it at the nearest window with all his strength. The chair shattered on impact, but the window didn't even crack. He tried again with a lamp, a vase, even one of his steel-toed boots. Nothing made the slightest dent in glass that should have been fragile but was somehow as impenetrable as steel. They were trapped, completely, utterly trapped, with 2 months until the date carved next to their names, in a house that had apparently decided they weren't allowed to leave. Sarah sank to the floor in the entrance hall, her back against the door that wouldn't open, and started laughing. It was a slightly hysterical sound, but she couldn't help it. They'd been so worried about the prediction of their deaths that they'd never considered the house might simply imprison them until that date arrived. "What do we do?" she asked when the laughter subsided. "Marcus, what do we do now?" He sat down beside her, and when he spoke his voice was hollow. "I don't know. I honestly don't know." They sat there for a long time, not speaking, just being together in the face of something neither of them could explain or escape. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and they dozed where they sat, slumped against each other on the cold hardwood floor. Sarah woke to daylight streaming through the windows, and Marcus shaking her shoulder. "Sarah. Sarah, wake up, the door is open." She blinked groggily, trying to make sense of his words. "What?" "The front door. It's unlocked. Come on, we can leave." They scrambled to their feet, Marcus grabbing the bags they'd dropped the night before. He turned the handle, and the door swung open easily, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. Cool morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and freedom. They ran to the car, throwing their bags in the back seat, and Marcus started the engine. But as he put the car in gear, something made Sarah look back at the house, and what she saw made her grab his arm. "Wait, stop." In the library window, clearly visible from where they sat, was a figure. It was too far away to make out details, but it was unmistakably human-shaped, standing perfectly still, watching them. "There's someone in our house," Sarah said. Marcus looked where she was pointing, his jaw tightening. "We should call the police."